So it's sad what the current educational situation is in our city. And the only people that are really hurting are the youth. The only people that are really experiencing or not getting the necessary experiences are our city's youth. So in my mind, I think when it comes to education, there's a couple of things. I think that we have to start to speak the language of the generation that's learning, more importantly than anything else. And what I mean by that is, when I turned 11 or 12, I got my first cell phone. And that's really when technology was first being introduced from a mainstream perspective. Now, years later, decades later, kids have access to technology at the age of 3. And their daily activities is built around what they can do with the technology that they have access to. So instead of taking a traditional approach, how about we provide solutions and we say, let's be progressive. Let's understand that these kids don't enjoy learning from school because we still use traditional methods in trying to teach them. And we have some phenomenal teachers in the Pontiac School District and the city of Pontiac in general. So I don't think that it's necessarily them. I think that it's the approach that we take to actually teaching the kids. And again, I'll say we just need to learn to speak their language. And once we can ultimately learn to speak their language, then I think that you'll see a difference in how they approach wanting to learn versus having to learn or being forced to learn. So one of the initiatives that I definitely want to push is entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and it's not to say that you can't be what's called an entrepreneur, where you can work at a corporation and act as an entrepreneur for that corporation, right? So you don't necessarily have to start your own business, but what I am recommending is we need more entrepreneurs. We need more people that are willing to be, if not an entrepreneur, self-employed to some extent. Again, it's back to that point of small businesses ultimately doing big things to service our community. And so the problem is, I don't think there's a lack of talent. I don't think there's a lack of creativity of people within our community. I think the issue is a lack of knowledge of resources that they have access to. There are a plethora of resources that we actually have that people would never know about for one reason or another. So one of the initiatives that I certainly want to push is becoming the place where entrepreneurs or people who are even thinking about starting a business, people who even have an idea about starting a business, has access to the necessary resources to ultimately try to cultivate and grow whatever that idea is. And again, if we can get back to small businesses doing big things, then we'll have as big of growth as any community that's currently pushing it. Unfortunately, when the economy collapsed, let's just call it happen, we weren't prepared as a community to move in a different direction. And so all of a sudden, systematically now, these things are passed generation to generation, and for decades, a new industry or industries hasn't necessarily been introduced to our city. And what that breeds is crime, unfortunately, and it's an issue here in Pontiac. What I'll say is there's nothing that stops a bullet like jobs. If you can provide jobs for individuals, if you can give them the ability to live and not have a median or a mean average income of $20,000 a year, which is a joke because next door is in the upwards of $70,000 on average, right? So if we can do something to just move the needle a little bit, I'm not saying that this is gonna happen tomorrow. What I am saying though is that over time, we can start to move this in the right direction. And what happens is, with crime in particular, we need to take a more proactive approach to crime opposed to a reactive approach to crime. And what I mean by that is things that are criminalized here in our city of Pontiac aren't necessarily criminalized elsewhere. And so if we start to be more proactive, we can start to decriminalize things that don't necessarily call for the full extent of the law, as long as people aren't being egregious or hurting anybody or doing anything that affects anybody else. Let's try to help individuals opposed to keeping them down and or immediately locking them in a jail cell. Because what happens is we never break that systematic cycle. They aren't ever taught how to become self-employed or business owners. Again, economy mixes with crime 100%, I think. And I think ultimately those two things trickle down into education to the youth. And so if we can take a more proactive approach to crime, I think that ultimately that would solve a lot of the crime issues. It may not stop it, but it'll definitely help us start going in the right direction. The fact is, our community isn't the only community that's taking the nail right now. Right? I think that Benton Harbor, Flint, we all know about, other inner cities across Michigan, the Detroit public school system, not just that, but our school system, our crime rates. I think that collectively we have to become a unit. We have to understand that we need to make the most important things and stop majoring in the minors, right? In order for us to ultimately be a progressive community. Now, if that isn't the goal, then I understand, but I would say that everyone that I've talked to wants a change for the better. And one of the things that I'm a real proponent of is I'm not here to debate what the facts are. I'm here to debate what the facts mean and then ultimately what the solutions are to those issues. My goal is to help build a bridge to a brighter future and help bridge whatever gaps may exist between different minorities, different groups, age groups, you name it. And I really do believe that the future is right now.
Paid for by the committee to elect Chris Jackson.